Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar here with HYCU and Knowmad Mood. For those who are just joining us, in about a minute or so, we're going to get started. So we're going to give you all a little bit of time to get comfortable. A couple housekeeping items. This session will be recorded. You can request access to not only the deck, but also the recording itself. There's a Q&A function as well. If you have any question at any point in time, leverage the Q&A function. We will make sure to even answer those questions as we speak on that very subject, but we will allocate a certain amount of time at the end to make sure that we answer those questions as well. So with that being said, let's get started. My name is Andy Fernandez. The focus of today is really precise on healthcare organizations. We work a lot with healthcare organizations, both of us, and we really have a good understanding based on our conversations with organizations and your peers on what are some of the threats that we're seeing today and what does the context of cyber resilience look like in a world of SaaS and cloud, especially in healthcare. Very excited today because it's not just me. I'm Andy Fernandez. I'm the Senior Director of Product Marketing here at HYCU. But I'm joined by a special guest from one of our key partners, Knowmad Mood. Jacques, why don't you tell folks a little bit about yourself?
Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Jacques Schoofs. I work for Knowmad Mood. I am a Atlassian senior consultant. I've been working in the Atlassian space since 2010, way back when data center and server and cloud didn't exist. We just had server. Since then, obviously, I've been growing in the Atlassian world. And about 8 years ago, I started as a consultant. Now I'm a full-blown Atlassian consultant in all the tools and bells and whistles that they have.
Thank you so much, Jacques. And the reason I'm so excited for Jacques being here is we're going to talk generally at first, and we're going to address some of the critical problem statements that your entire data estate has. All of your SaaS, your cloud, even your on-prem infrastructure. But then we're going to hone in and use a specific example of the Atlassian stack, where Jacques is an expert, and we're going to really hone in on some of these questions that you may have, and then use it as an example as well. Now, the agenda for today, we're going to talk a little bit about cyber threats. This is something that has been going on for years. Nobody here is going to be a stranger to this topic. But we're going to talk about recent surges. We're going to talk about what the future holds, especially the near future with the use of AI to drive a higher volume of these threats. We're going to talk about how the world has completely changed and how you are to protect your data estates and what is the relation of cloud hosted applications and your responsibility. We're going to take a look at, as you're planning for cyber resilience, as you look into your budget, as you look into your strategy for next year, what is the role of recovery, specifically backup and recovery, and of course, how HYCU and Knowmad Mood are going to help. For those who don't know about either organization or seeing us and we're trialing for the first time, HYCU is the fastest data protection provider in the world. We're the #1 when it comes to SaaS data protection, and we're globally recognized and trusted. We have investments from Atlassian, Cisco, Okta, but also critical institutional investors as well, with over 4,600 organizations that trust us with their crown jewels of their environment globally, and of course with several partners, but very, very specialized partners, and Knowmad Mood is an example of that today. Now, for those who probably recognize HYCU, I really want to take a little bit of time to introduce a little bit more about Knowmad Mood, why we partnered with them, why they're such a critical resource for you, especially in the healthcare space. So I'm going to hand it over to Jacques.
Yeah, so as I said, I work for Knowmad Mood, and Knowmad Mood represents an ecosystem of companies dedicated to services, training, technology, and it contains, apart from the actual Knowmad Mood company, it also contains all these other companies that we currently have. New Verve Consulting is our Atlassian consultancy that is based out of Scotland. Inthippi is a company that is based in digital transformation and strategy of business and organizations with a focus on people, HR. Then we have Interware, which is a technology consultancy specialized in security, communications, systems, and cloud processes. Acervo is our German-based Atlassian consultancy. They are specialized in ITSM, PPM, DevOps, and other security solutions. Then we also recently acquired the Antea Group, which is a company specialized in security, based out of Spain and Mexico. We are looking as a brand, as a company, we are looking to expand our base in the US through M&A acquisitions. Next slide, please. So what do we do as a company? We are a 360 company. We go from the hardware to the software to the training to the services, as you can see here on your screen. We have a huge amount of what we call technological communities, which can help you with any kind of problem that you have. As I said, I'm from the Atlassian community, but we have communities based that are specialized in Microsoft, in PHP, in Java, in data analytics and automations, Internet of Things and smart industry. We also have a specialized company based that is dedicated to training, and you can see them here all on screen. So in a nutshell, this is basically our company, a 360 services company that can help you with any kind of service that you need.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jackson. What's exciting about Knowmad Mood and our partnership is not only the broadness, right? Your company has an entire data estate that requires different levels of protection and specialization. Together, we're able to really look into problems as a whole, but also go deep into specific areas of your technology stack as well. Now, let's transition over to today's topic as well, because this is something I'm very excited about, a lot of the research and a lot of the conversations that we're having. And when we're talking to CIOs, VPs of ITs within the healthcare space and other ancillary areas as well, these are some of the top healthcare priorities that we're seeing. This is no surprise to anybody on this call, but I want to reiterate the reasons why there's such a priority. We know that there's going to be, and this is not a healthcare phenomena, this is a global phenomena, is the increased investment in supporting analytics, data warehouses, and also full generative AI use cases. Obviously, this has to be done with security in mind and compliance in mind, but there is still a massive investment in the healthcare space to be able to facilitate this. A lot of the times, this places a large level of burden and responsibility on you on the IT side to be able to not only support this, but to do it in a way that is secure, compliant, and safe for the organization. And with that being said, because the cyber threat landscape is not only profit-seeking individuals, but also state-backed attacks, we are seeing countless and countless of examples where the threat volume, the threat severity of cyber attacks and ransomware attacks continue to grow in the healthcare space with very, very precise attacks on healthcare-focused organizations. And of course, the regulatory requirement is evolving with technology stacks all over the world. But something that I want to mention here is, why are we even having this conversation? If we would have joined us in a conversation 3 to 4 years ago, we were already talking about how the volume of ransomware attacks increased. But there is a phenomenon surrounded by this. And it's the fact that if we go back 8, 9, 10 years, if you were a nefarious individual and you were looking to exploit a company, you had to, let's call it for lack of a better term, almost a full stack hacker, in the sense that you have to have a good understanding of how to do your research, how to find and target individuals and organizations, how to write malware, and how to effectively deploy this. Now, what we saw a couple of years ago was the growth of what we call the ransomware as a service, meaning entire marketplaces out there that allowed you to centralize and offload a lot of these responsibilities that come with a cyber attack. And it made it a lot easier. And then you saw a drastic spike in ransomware attacks. But that was 3 to 4 years ago. You probably heard all this research showing, every 9 seconds there's a ransomware attack. But there's something happening now that makes this even more concerning to individuals. And that is going to be what we call AI-driven searches. So for example, something that we found was there's already jailbroken, exploited generative AI models that are being used for cyber crime. Now, why is this different? Well, before you would have to go into the dark web, you would have to procure services, scripts in order to go and execute an attack. All of a sudden now, even that is automated. Your ability to not only write malware, your ability to QA this malware, your ability to do research and discovery is one click away. And I'm going to give you a very precise example of how dangerous this is. One of the simplest ways where organizations are able to identify phishing attacks is looking for bad grammar, looking for tones that don't sound like a CEO. But for example, within both of our organizations, we have CEOs who are industry leaders, industry thought leaders, with thousands of hours available of their conversations, their vision for the future, but most importantly, their tone. 10 years ago, somebody overseas in any other location, they would have to really work very hard to capture that tone. All of a sudden now you feed a model and you can capture a person's tone and really reach out to somebody, whether that's SNS or email, and sound exactly like that CEO. This brings in a whole new layer of sophistication on the social side, and it's creating a perfect storm for organizations. So just to wrap up a couple things here. There is a surge in cyber threats. They are becoming more advanced. It is becoming easier to become a cyber criminal, whether you are profit seeking or state backed. But now the final challenge in this space is that your tech stack is much more complex than has ever been before. And what do I mean by this? Well, I'll give you an example in a second. But what we're noticing is even your core infrastructure is changing. Organizations are already looking at alternatives from VMware, whether it's because of cost or whether other use cases that you need. You're looking at alternatives within hyperconverged infrastructure. Potentially, organizations like yourselves are also lifting and shifting, but especially in healthcare, we're seeing high rates of modernization, meaning to drive these ML and AI use cases, you need data warehouses. And you can find some of the best in the world within these public cloud service models. And of course, the majority of these services that you're leveraging from the business side are no longer on-prem, but they're actually cloud hosted. And this is a very, very important distinction because we're really going to focus on this right side, which is what is the risk profile of your organization and leveraging these as a service models as well. And why we're focusing on this is because we know that the threats are increasing, they're becoming more sophisticated, and we know that SaaS applications are the #1 target for cyber attacks. And we know that they're actually the most successful attack as well. But the reason that we're seeing this is because there's a lot of myths and a lot of mythology that's been built out, and then Jacques and I are going to debunk. And we're going to take a look at some of these cloud myths and really identify exactly the mistakes that organizations, even at the CIO level, are making in their assumptions of SaaS. But before I get into that, Jacques, you've been in the industry for a very long time. You've worked with enterprises all over the world, from CIOs to practitioners. Why is it so easy for these organizations to assume that they don't have so many SaaS applications?
Well, basically, just in one of the slides before that you said, okay, this is what you currently have. You have AWS, you have Google, you have et cetera, and more or less you led to interpret that these are on-prem instances. But basically, they're also SaaS solutions. They're also a service that is provided to the client. So what we consider, and sometimes with our clients, we have this discussion when they talk about a cloud solution and we talk about the cloud solution, we sometimes have different concepts because when we talk about Atlassian Cloud, for instance, which will come out throughout the talk, we are talking about the SaaS solution. So anything below the actual functionality of an application is managed by the application or the SaaS vendor. If you need to install your own hardware and software, then you are you're using cloud, but then we consider this for our purpose of understanding, we consider this on-prem or your own version of Jira or Confluence. Now, also what happens is that a lot of the clients that we have are usually not very comfortable, and especially in the healthcare sector, to outsource their data. As you know, in any kind of sector, but especially in healthcare, data and the sensitivity of data is very important to maintain and make sure that nobody can access it unless you control it for yourself. So the SaaS solutions sometimes have a blocker based on these security rules, because it's as you say, when you have a child that grows up, at a certain moment you will have to let it go and say, okay, you can go your own way. But with these SaaS solutions, you're losing for a certain part the control over what is happening with it. It's also more open. As you said, there are more attacks on SaaS solutions than on the internal solutions that you might have, because you yourself have more control. On the other hand, Having more control gives you also the problem of maintaining that control. You need to perform upgrades. There are going to be security releases which you, within the daily workings of your company, are not going to be implemented because there are other priorities. And that is one of the reasons that we try to convince our customers that are still in the Atlassian space, in data center or even server, to migrate to cloud, to get away out of this particular hassle, because just to add, Atlassian is a very open and very secure infrastructure. They're the typical do not the customer, and they are very open. They are very transparent in what they do, how they do it. They even invite you to do your own penetration testing.
No, absolutely, Jacques. That's super helpful. And something to make very clear here as well is there's a reason why SaaS applications are getting adopted. They bring flexibility, they bring scale, they bring incredible amounts of value. The danger here lies is not having a good understanding of that landscape, of the scope of your responsibility, and the right levels of remediation when there is a cyber threat in the SaaS space. But one thing that I want to bring up, because Jacques, we're going to touch on this shortly, is the number one myth that we encounter. And I would love to ask the audience as well, if you are someone in the healthcare organization right now, think very critically about how many SaaS applications your organization is actually using. Think about that. And I'll give you some examples. We talk to CISOs and CIOs all the time, as Jacques does as well. And we ask them point blank, how many SaaS applications do you have? And even in very large organizations, they tell us, well, probably 5 to 7. And they'll name the usual suspects. They'll tell you, well, we're leveraging, Microsoft 365 or Google Workspace. We're using Salesforce, and they'll name potentially collaboration suite. So they'll name Atlassian. We use Jira in the organization. And that is what we found in our research. When you actually look at the reality with validated surveys, we found that the average mid-sized organization actually has 217 SaaS applications. Even an organization with 2, 3, 4,000 employees has 200 SaaS applications. But just for this exercise, so Jacques, HYCU, we're a rapid growing company. We have around 400 employees. How many SaaS applications, Jacques, do you think we at HYCU as a technology company are using with around 400 employees?
I wouldn't go below 250.
Okay, well, we're actually doing pretty well, Jacques.
Okay.
Thankfully, we're very disciplined, but still, 400 employees. We're using over 70 unique SaaS applications and platforms. Over 70, not only to build software, but to also manage billing, to manage accounts, to manage support. So what it shows you is even a growing technology company like HYCU is using a massive amount of SaaS applications. Imagine if your organization, especially if you have multiple branches, has 1,000 employees and practitioners, 2,000, 5,000. You can start doing the math. And it's very easy for people to realize or to not realize how many applications they're actually running. And the analogy that we like to use is thinking of the data estates and your technology stack as a castle. 15 years ago, 20 years ago, as Jacques had mentioned, every business application, every use case, every piece of data existed inside of a data center. And maybe you had colo and DR facilities, but you had a data center where staff can go in and check on the networking, on the firewall, on the storage, but also on the core virtual machines that are powering these applications. If we fast forward to today, yes, there's still data centers. That's not going to go away, but organizations in their data is everywhere because they are subscribed to multiple cloud platforms. They are leveraging multiple SaaS applications. And it's very, very easy to lose scope and an understanding of how many SaaS applications do they actually have. And what we've realized in the theory that we have is a lot of the times, most people, and Jacques, you know this, can go and procure a SaaS service with their credit card. Even something that could be used in production. You can go and leverage a private account or a credit card, and it's basically T&E. And all of a sudden, IT doesn't see that, so they don't assume that there's that SaaS application. But what I ask of everyone in the organization, especially for those attending, is take a look, inquire your team. How are we leveraging the signing of paperwork and management of that? Are you using something like DocuSign? Where's our IP stored? These are critical things to assess in your organization. But what I want to drive in now, and we're going to get in a little bit more deeper with Jacques here, is it's very, very important to understand that all of these critical goals that you have in your organization, whether it's driving AI use cases, whether it's protecting your organization, keeping up with compliance, driving better margins, they can all be completely disrupted by one single data loss scenario. And we see it in the news all of the time, especially within healthcare, where organizations, dozens and dozens, fall victim to these threats every single year. And we're seeing it not only specifically targeting healthcare organizations, but the customers of SaaS applications themselves. So whether your organization suffers from a ransomware attack, whether there is an insider threat that decides to go and delete critical data, whether it's simple human error, what we call fat fingers, somebody makes a mistake, it could still lead to a significant data loss event. You have supply chain incidents, you have outages and disasters. So it's very, very important to think of when you're thinking about business continuity, when you're thinking about availability, we still have our virtual machine hat on. We're still thinking about our critical tier one applications that are sitting in a data center, but we're not thinking about the threats of the entire data estate, which includes cloud and SaaS. But here is where the gravest sin is in SaaS and clouds, because they are incredible technologies. They bring us value. We highly recommend it. But the biggest myth, Jack, that we find is SaaS and cloud applications are not my responsibility. Jacques, why do you think people make this mistake? Why is it so easy to simply subscribe, deprecate whatever you're using on-prem, and believe that you don't have to worry about anything again?
Yeah, well, the reason is simple. As we've explained, people usually have their own data center with their own servers. They do everything themselves. They set up the application. They provide the backup plan, disaster recovery, et cetera, et cetera. And when you present them with a SaaS solution, and again, I'm talking in the Atlassian space, they think or they do not think about backups because they think, okay, somebody takes care of the application. So they'll also take care of the backup, which is not the case in most of these situations. So Atlassian, again here as a very transparent and very open company, actually mentions this in their recoverability of their resilience approach. They say, literally, and I'm reading what they say, Atlassian's backups are not used to revert customer-initiated destructive changes, such as fields overwritten using scripts or deleted issues, projects, or sites. So you as a customer can go in and delete an entire Jira project or an entire Confluence space. Atlassian will not help you to recuperate this. And this is one of the things that we always, in this entire migration to cloud and other clients that we get onboarded in cloud, we always stress that they are responsible for their own data backup.
Absolutely. And Jacques, what's going to be very valuable for the audience today is we're focusing on Atlassian Cloud. We're using a specific critical SaaS application as an example. But what Jacques is covering here applies to every SaaS application that you're leveraging. This shared responsibility model is a foundational framework for all cloud and SaaS applications, whether it's AWS, whether it's Azure, whether it's Google Cloud, whether it's Salesforce, GitLab, they all provide kind of the same breakdown. Atlassian goes above and beyond and is so direct and explicit about what they're providing that it's commendable. One of the examples to use here, because a lot of folks think, well, and Jacques, you probably hear this all the time, well, they're in charge of high availability. They have backups. Why can't they use those backups to help me out? And the way that we can think about this is think about any cloud platform, but let's use Atlassian as an example, and let's think of it as a parking garage. Jacques and I are going into town. We are going to park our car in a garage. What are our expectations? Well, that we can get in, that we can pay for it, that the lights are on, and that when we come back, that there's still a car there. Those are the expectations. And the garage will fulfill that. They are responsible for that. But what if I leave the window open and someone steals Jacques' laptop, or somebody scratches the car, or somebody slashes the tires? It's not on the garage to pay for that. It's not their responsibility. And it's the same dynamic as with the quote that Jacques has read, which is if a customer makes a mistake, if I go and I delete a bunch of assets or change the object type of it on an asset, there's no way for Atlassian to understand what is a good deletion or what is a bad deletion. So it's on the customer to understand, here is my risk, here are my mistakes. And that's a super helpful analogy to think about that. But let's dive in, Josh, a little bit deeper into this. And before we dive in a little bit more into the shared responsibility model, one of the things that we realize as well is simply because our dependence on virtual machines and our physical service to drive our applications, we're always thinking when it comes to cybersecurity, when it comes to data protection, we're thinking that the most critical applications to protect are VMs and the applications that are hosted there. But the SaaS application is as critical, especially if it touches production. Jacques, can you talk a little bit about some of the use cases that you're seeing that are super critical for customers, where they're leveraging Confluence, where they're leveraging Jira or Jira Service Management, and they cannot afford to lose that data?
Yeah, obviously, very often, basically all our clients that use these applications, use this for business processes. If Very often, what we'll see, for instance, is that if you have a software development team, they will write the recommendations or the requirements for that specific software in Confluence or in a Jira ticket. Now, if somebody goes in and deletes that Jira ticket or goes in and deletes the entire Confluence space, obviously you lose that. And that is very important. Now, when it comes to security and this shared responsibility, what I'd like to stress is obviously security is a very broad term and covers a huge amount of items. The part that is your responsibility as a customer from Atlassian is you are responsible for managing your users, their permissions, and you're also responsible for the data that you have your users create or that you have available. You cannot expect Atlassian to go into your project or into your space and say, okay, this permission is wrong because with this permission you give access to the
Is Atlassian responsible for, and what are we as an organization and as a user responsible for? And Jacques will be our source of truth here. I'll give you an example. If there is a global outage, if something happens to the Atlassian systems, whose responsibility is it, right? It's Atlassian's responsibility because they maintain availability. That is their contractual obligation, and they will make sure, and they will do this, they will recover after any outage, just like AWS, just like Microsoft. Jacques, can you validate that? Is that correct? Customers not responsible for that?
Correct. That is correct. As a matter of fact, a couple of years ago, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago, Atlassian had a huge outage, and some of their clients were without data during, I think, a couple of weeks or 3 or 4 weeks. And Atlassian made sure that all the data was restored after this outage.
And that's their responsibility because they have system level backups, right, on RDS, where they can go and say, well, for this entire region and this entire set of tenants, we will make sure that we recover everything fully. But Jacques, we've had some contractors and we've been a little bit too loose with our administrative privileges, and somebody has gone and deleted several Confluence spaces. Jacques, whose responsibility is that to protect and recover from a Confluence space?
As I clearly mentioned, this is your organization's responsibility. You cannot go to Atlassian and say, please restore this information for me. This is where you need to have your backup and be able to restore whatever you want to restore.
Exactly. And I'm going to use one more example because especially in today's conversation with such a cybersecurity lens, if there's a supply chain attack, if there's any global incident, Atlassian has security practice and remediation for that. But Jacques, if I just am lazy one day and I make my administrative password, and somebody gets in and changes a couple of things, is that on Atlassian or is that on me?
It is obviously on you, clearly.
Exactly. Exactly. But Jacques, that's the reason where we talked about why SaaS applications are such an easy target. Because imagine Atlassian still sits within IT, or it sits within a development organization with that are technically savvy and are aware from a security perspective, right? They're leveraging SSO, they're leveraging best practices, they're rotating passwords. But imagine, Jacques, folks who are managing marketing staff. In fact, we've seen organizations where the chief marketing officer has a larger tech stack than the CTO, right? Because they're dealing with CRMs, they're dealing with billing, they're dealing with analytics tools. Yet potentially they source these tools, and are they following best practices? So the point here is that we're using Atlassian as an example, but it's very critical that you know exactly the entire estate and the total amount of applications that your organization depends on, because you'd be very surprised what kind of data is stored on that. So now we're going to move into the final area. And this is something that we've observed as an evolution in the industry. And I've heard this many times. We need to focus on preventing cyber attacks. Preventing cyber attacks absolutely is a critical focus. That is a no-brainer, but it cannot be the only focus. The reason I say this is, and you can find the data, and we can provide this after the webinar as well, is last year, there were over $200 billion spent on cybersecurity tools. $200 billion spent. That number will grow this year. Yet we continue seeing attacks happen day in and day out, successful attacks happening. We continue adding more money, yet the improvement is not always there. And the reason for this is, we've talked about this. Cybersecurity sometimes is one of those places where the scale of innovation sometimes lies in the hands of a criminal, and a very intelligent criminal. And they're always finding new ways, and it's a game of cat and mouse. And so data protection, as you can see in the NIST framework, has to be part of your cyber resilience strategy. When you think about how are we going to be best equipped to be resilient in the face of a cyber attack or an insider threat, recovery has to be part of the plan. So one of the things that we're going to provide, and Jacques, feel free to pitch in at any point in time, because I know that you have so much experience and best practices in this space, especially in the scope of Atlassian. But there's kind of three things that we recommend that as a healthcare CIO, as a VP of IT, or as a CISO, that you do within your organization. There's three core categories. You have to understand what your organization is actually using. We've seen so many times that CIOs are underestimating their SaaS footprint by 10x. So you have to visualize what that threat landscape looks like. You have to identify and protect to make sure that your organization doesn't have privilege escalations. Are people getting access to your Entra ID and Okta administrative privileges? And you have to make sure that you have data protection in mind. So there's a couple guidelines that we're going to provide here. The first thing is visualizing your threat landscape. This is not simply saying, yes, we're using 365, Salesforce, maybe Dynamics, and we're using Atlassian. Let's go and protect that. Think about your entire organization. What is HR and legal doing? Where are all the critical, personal, identifiable information that is hosted by HR? Is it hosted in your data center, or is it hosted in a SaaS application like Workday or Box? What is your engineering team leveraging? What are some of the cloud services? And Jacques made a very, very good point here, where a lot of the times when you think AWS and you think Google, you're thinking similar to on-prem. But it's not simply a new infrastructure that you leverage. It's dozens of decoupled services that make this application together. Are you protecting your compute, your storage, your database? And of course, these specialized healthcare SaaS applications as well, right? We look at things that are electronic health records, communication tools, diagnostic tools. There's so many tools that are now SaaS applications. They're much more flexible. They're phenomenal, but you have to make sure that you're aware that you're leveraging it as a SaaS application. And of course, managing your identity. And the piece here, Jacques, when you want to jump in as well, it's what do you actually do about any of these core applications? And we're going to use Atlassian as an example. At minimum, what you can do, whether you are scripting this or leveraging a third-party solution like HYCU, you have to make sure that you're taking your backups. You have to make sure that you can recover this data, not only in bulk, but from specific deletions, what we call an operational recovery. The data needs to be stored somewhere. It needs to be kept immutable, and it needs to be documented. This is not the final strategy. This is not an official run book. This is simply some of the core tenets that you must follow. Jacques, based on your experience and exclusive to Atlassian as well, any recommendations that you have for somebody who's migrating to the cloud and is now starting to think about their security and data protection posture?
Mm. One of the things that we like about HYCU is the possibility to do um, incremental backups, because what we feel is that in the Atlassian tools themselves, there is a way of performing your backup. You go into the system and say, okay, backup everything, but it backs up everything. What you have here with HYCU is that you can, and this is something of the things that we recommend to our clients, is go in, and if we do these migrations with 2,000, 3,000 projects, and in total they have like 3 or 4 million tickets, obviously you do not want to update or back them up every time, because there will be a huge amount of projects that you've been not using anymore. So you will just back them up once and then do the granular backup as Andy has said. We also need to look at the recovery model. Because again, same as security, backup is also a very wide area. Usually when we talk about backup, you can think about your disaster recovery plan, but with this granular backup and granular recovery, you can go into the detail as of saying, okay, somebody by default, by error, deleted this particular attachment in this particular issue of Jira, and there's no trash, so you need to get it back from a backup. That is perfectly possible. And all these little items are the reason why we recommend to our clients HYCU.
No, thank you so much, Jax. And a lot of this too is making sure that you have the right documentation, having partners that can provide the guidelines on this is the frequency we believe. This is the type of storage. It is very different to do a export of Jira or Confluence and then keep it in a hard drive where nobody else knows about it. It's a very, very different dynamic than to have automated backups in an S3 environment that is secure and offsite. And so it's having a partner that can guide you through this, not only at the macro level, but also deep into the specific use cases of technologies like Atlassian or GitLab as well. So, and of course, in my animation, I forgot to talk about something critical, evidence and proof of this, especially in healthcare, especially with HIPAA. You want to make sure that you also have logging, reporting, and notifications of incidents. You want to make sure that there's zero surprises, because what we're noticing is that backup is the last line of defense in a ransomware attack. The last line of defense after everything goes bad, people think, can we recover operations leveraging our backups? So it's very, very important that you're confident that those backups and that recovery has been tested and is working. And for the last few minutes, and we're going to take a look at some of the questions, it's how do we actually help here? How does HYCU and Knowmad Mood together help organizations? First, we're going to take a look at the macro view. The most important thing about what we're able to do is make sure that we take a look at your entire organization and say, whatever your data estate is, whether you have a flavor of on-prem, cloud, and several SaaS applications like Atlassian, that you can see them at all times, that you can protect them at all times in a secure, automated, and effective way, that you can recover, and you can actually move these workloads, especially when you're thinking about on-prem, cloud workloads and instances. And of course, the most important thing for today's conversation is you need to take an honest accounting of your SaaS estate. And we have a solution here that we leverage with partners like Knowmad Mood called rGraph. This is a free service that you can do as long as you're leveraging Okta or Entra ID in the organization. And what it does, it actually crawls through your entire directory. Even if you've had multiple acquisitions, even if you're leveraging both Okta and Entra ID in multiple iterations of that in your organization, you can consolidate all of this and all of a sudden discover all sources, categorize them by departments, see a full visual and a full map of all of these services that you're using, and start actually exposing the ones that potentially might not have a native backup and recovery service. From there, once you actually assign a backup, then you can also monitor and make sure that your organization is fully protected. So you're going to find in this, when you do the analysis, you're going to find that organizations like Jira, they do provide scripts. They provide APIs. They provide abilities for you to build your own backup, or you can leverage a third party. You'll find that other SaaS applications have no self-recovery options for customers. It is super, super important to be able to identify these. And of course, it's important to be able to protect them. And here's an example of what you would see with GitHub as well. But this applies to GitLab. It applies to any service that you're using in your organization. And of course, together, we can protect the entire data estate. And what's super, super important about this is that you're able to protect over 80 integrations with HYCU. No other data protection provider is able to provide this level of coverage, but also this level of depth to make sure that we focus on your critical use cases like in Jira and Confluence and in Jira Service Management. And that also applies to our partnerships and the experts that we choose to work with, like Shak's focus on Atlassian within the broad estate of Knowmad Mood as well. So with that being said, I'll make sure to monitor for questions, but you can simply get started. You can ask for HYCU, you can ask for Knowmad Mood. Together we can go and make sure that we help you with your assessment and help you start protecting your organizations. But before I monitor for any other questions, Jacques, any final words of wisdom, especially for folks who are now starting their migrations, who are now thinking about, well, should I do this now? Should I wait? What's the focus? Any final words of wisdom?
First of all, I would like to recommend that they contact us, obviously, because we can help them in their migration efforts. And just like any other kind of deployment or implementation that you do, take your backup strategy and your restore strategy, take that within your migration effort, because it is going to be very important that you get this set out from the start. If you do it at the end, you will see that you're lost in work, that you no longer have time for it, and you think, well, why would I do this? Because we've been running 2 years without backup and we could still continue. But the day that you get an attack or the day that somebody does delete that important information, then you'll think, should I have done this? I should have done this from the beginning.
Jacques, that's 100% accurate. So many times, and this is also a common myth that we should have discussed as well, which is folks thinking, well, it hasn't happened. Nobody's made a massive issue. But so many times we have conversations with organizations and they're like, well, we'll take a look. And then something bad happens. And then they have a decision to go in. And whether that's protecting, improving their data protection on-prem or an application like that's consumed as a SaaS like Jira, oftentimes it takes a bad scenario or a bad event to make a decision. And ultimately, just like life insurance or health insurance, you need to think through exactly what the worst case is. And it's always good to make sure that your data is fully protected. So with that being said, if you have any questions, please send us an email. Jacques and myself will make sure to answer any question that you have. We are here to help you. We know the specific challenges within the healthcare space. We know the risks involved, and we're here to support you on both sides. So with that, I want to thank you all for your time and your attention. Jacques, thank you so much for lending your expertise today. It's been a pleasure. Please let us know if you have any questions, and we hope you have a great day.